The scent of blood reached Elara before she saw him metallic and sharp, cutting through the pine-thick air of the borderlands where no wolf dared tread after dark. She should have turned back, should have ignored the labored breathing echoing from the ravine below, should have remembered that curiosity had cost her everything once before. But Elara had never been good at should. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The moon hung low and swollen, casting silver shadows across the forbidden zone between pack territories, a no-man's land, where rogues died and secrets were buried. Her basket of nightshade and moonflower trembled in her grip as she peered over the ravine's edge, and her breath caught. A wolf lay crumpled among the rocks, massive even in his broken state. His coat was darker than midnight, so black it seemed to swallow the moonlight rather than reflect it. Blood pooled beneath him, turning the frost-covered stones into mirrors of crimson. One of his back legs twisted at an unnatural angle, and deep gashes scored his side claw marks from something with talons longer than any wolf possessed. This was no ordinary wolf. Even half dead, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. An alpha, certainly, but there was something more. Something that made the very air around him feel heavy, charged, dangerous. Elara's fingers found the worn leather cord at her throat, tracing the small iron pendant her grandmother had pressed into her palm 6 years ago. "They'll come for you one day, little shadow," she'd whispered with her dying breath. "When they do, remember your weakness is your strength, and your silence is your shield." She'd understood the first part. Being mute had always made her weak in the eyes of the Ashwood pack. An Omega who couldn't even voice submission, couldn't howl with the pack under the full moon, couldn't scream when the Alpha's son had tried to force a bond she didn't want. That night, 6 years ago, she'd bitten him hard enough to leave scars and fled into these borderlands where outcasts went to disappear. The second part, the silence being her shield, she was still learning. The wolf's breathing hitched, grew shallower. In minutes, maybe less, he would be dead. "Not your problem," Elara told herself firmly. "Not your pack, not your responsibility." But her feet were already carrying her down the ravine's slope, her healer's instincts overriding every shred of common sense. She'd survived 6 years alone in the borderlands by being cautious, by staying hidden, by never drawing attention. Helping a dying alpha wolf violated every rule she'd set for herself. Yet here she was, kneeling in his blood, her hands already moving to assess his injuries. Up close, he was even larger than she'd thought, easily the size of a small horse, with a build that spoke of violence and victory in equal measure. His muzzle was graying slightly, suggesting age, but the muscles beneath his matted fur were still powerful. This was a wolf who'd seen centuries, not mere decades. The claw marks were deep, poisoned. She could smell the venom worm toxin, rare and deadly, used by the shadow creatures that occasionally crept up from the deep caves to the north. Without treatment, the poison would reach his heart within the hour. Elara worked quickly, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. She pressed moss against the worst of the wounds, then reached into her basket for the crushed nightshade leaves toxic to most, but in small doses, they could counteract worm venom. Her grandmother had taught her that, along with 100 other remedies the Ashwood pack healers had deemed unnecessary for an Omega to know. As she worked, the wolf's breathing steadied fractionally. His eyes remained closed, but she felt the moment his consciousness flickered. Back a subtle shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Predator's instinct, waking to find prey too close. She froze, her hand still pressed against his side where the worst gash had been. Slowly, his eyes opened. They were gold. Not yellow, not amber, but pure molten gold, burning with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that had witnessed the first wolves walk the earth. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. But something held her there, not fear, but a strange pull, like a hook lodged deep in her chest, tethering her to this creature who should have been a stranger. "Who are you?" The question formed in her mind, though she couldn't voice it. Her fingers moved instead, signing the words in the silent language she'd developed over years of solitude, a language no one else knew, that no one else could read. The wolf's eyes widened fractionally. Then, impossibly, his form began to shift. Elara scrambled backward as bones cracked and reformed, as midnight fur receded to reveal bronze skin marked with scars that told stories of battles she couldn't imagine. When the transformation completed, a man knelt where the wolf had been naked, bleeding, but alive. He was beautiful in a terrifying way, sharp features that seemed carved from stone, shoulder-length black hair that fell in waves around a face that could have been 30 or 3,000. Those gold eyes burned brighter in his human form, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to bare her throat and run in equal measure. "You," he said, his voice rough as gravel but carrying an undertone of absolute authority. "You're—" He broke off, his hand moving to his side, where her makeshift bandages were already soaked through with blood. The worm poison was still working its way through his system, and the shift had cost him. Elara's healer's instinct overrode her fear. She moved forward again, reaching for more supplies, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist. The grip wasn't painful, but it was unbreakable, a reminder that even wounded and poisoned, he was far stronger than she could ever be. "What pack?" he demanded. She met his eyes, saw the question there, the suspicion. Then she opened her mouth, let him see the scar tissue that lined her throat, the result of the Ashwood Pack's punishment when she dared refuse their future alpha. When they'd realized she couldn't scream, couldn't submit vocally, they'd made sure everyone knew why. Understanding flickered across his features, followed by something darker. Rage, barely controlled. "They cut you." It wasn't a question. His eyes tracked the scars, and his hand on her wrist loosened, became almost gentle. "Which pack?" Elara pulled free and returned to her work, ignoring his question. It didn't matter which pack. They were all the same hierarchies built on dominance, on breaking those who didn't fit their narrow definitions of strength. She'd learned that lesson 6 years ago, and she had no intention of repeating it. She packed his wounds with a paste made from moonflower and ash, then bound them with strips torn from her only spare dress. The poison was slowing now, her remedies fighting back its creep toward his heart. He would live, though he'd need days to fully heal, even with a werewolf's regenerative abilities. When she finished, she moved to gather her things, to disappear back into the borderlands before this stranger could ask more questions she couldn't answer. But his voice stopped her. "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they carried a weight that made her pause. She looked back at him, found him still watching her with those impossible eyes. "I am Theron," he said, and the name resonated in the air like a bell tolling. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And you, little healer, have just saved a life that half the realm would pay kingdoms to end." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. The Alpha King, the legend, the wolf who'd supposedly united 7 territories under one rule 3 centuries ago, who commanded loyalty from alphas who'd never bent knee to anyone. She'd heard the stories every wolf had, but stories were supposed to stay stories, not bleed out in ravines in the middle of the night. Elara shook her head, grabbed her basket, and turned to leave. This was too much, too dangerous, wait. The command in that single word froze her in place. Not an alpha command, those didn't work on her, had never worked on her, much to the Ashwood Pack's frustration. This was something else, something older. "You can't just walk away," Theron said, and she heard him struggle to his feet behind her, heard the sharp intake of breath as the movement pulled at his wounds. "Those who attacked me, they'll be hunting for confirmation of my death, if they catch. You're sent here, if they realize you helped me." He didn't need to finish. Elara understood perfectly. She'd painted a target on her back the moment she'd descended into this ravine. She turned back slowly, and her hands moved in the signs only she understood, knowing he couldn't read them but needing to express her frustration somehow. Her fingers formed shapes in the air. "Why me? Why did you have to be here? Why couldn't you have just died quietly like any sensible dying wolf?" Something flickered in his expression. Not understanding, but recognition? He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're not just mute," he said slowly. "There's something else. Something." His eyes widened fractionally. "You're using sign language, but not any sign language I've seen in 300 years of life. You created your own, didn't you? In your isolation." Elara's hands stilled. The fact that he'd deduced that from mere moments of observation was unsettling. This wasn't just any alpha. This was a predator who'd survived centuries by being more intelligent, more observant, more dangerous than anyone else. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Where do you live? He asked, gentler now. I need shelter until dawn. Then I'll leave, and you'll never see me again. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Whatever had brought assassins after the Alpha King, it wasn't over, and she'd already entangled herself in it by saving his life. But the alternative, leaving him here to be found by whoever had nearly killed him, felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. Her grandmother's words echoed again. Your weakness is your strength. Maybe being unable to refuse helping the wounded was both her weakness and her strength. Or maybe she was just a fool. Elara gestured for him to follow, then began the trek back toward her cottage, hidden deep in the borderlands where no wolf ventured willingly. Behind her, she heard Theron's labored breathing, heard him struggle to keep pace despite his injuries. The walk took 20 minutes, 20 minutes of listening to every snap of twig, every rustle of leaves, wondering if assassins lurked in the shadows. But they reached her cottage without incident, and Elara pushed open the door to her sanctuary. It wasn't much, a single room with a hearth, a bed of moss and furs, shelves lined with dried herbs and tinctures, but it was hers, earned through 6 years of survival, and bringing a stranger into it felt like a violation of something sacred. Theron stepped inside, and the space immediately felt smaller. He moved to the hearth, still naked and bloodied, and sank down onto the stone floor with a barely suppressed groan. His wounds were seeping again, the bandages already soaked through. Elara closed the door, activated the ward's simple things, meant to confuse the senses of any wolf who got too close, then returned to her work. She rebound his wounds with clean cloth, applied more of the paste, forced him to drink a bitter tea that would help his body fight the last of the poison. Through it all, he watched her, not with the dismissive gaze of alphas who'd looked through her all her life, but with genuine curiosity. How long have you been alone? He finally asked. Elara held up 6 fingers. 6 years. He absorbed that. And before that? She pointed to her throat, to the scars. They punished you for refusing someone. Understanding dawned in his expression. The Alpha's son? She nodded once. And you've survived out here, alone, for 6 years. Growing herbs, learning remedies, avoiding pack wolves. He shook his head slightly. That takes more strength than most alphas possess. The compliment caught her off guard. She wasn't used to compliments. Wasn't used to being seen as anything other than defective. I need to know what you know about the borderlands, Theron said, his voice growing serious. The creatures that dwell here, the safe paths, the dangers. Because come dawn, I'll need to reach the Stone Circle Sanctuary. It's 3 days north, and I can't do it without a guide. Elara's hands moved before she could stop them. Not my problem. He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face from terrifying to devastating. You saved my life. That makes it absolutely your problem, little shadow. The nickname sent a jolt through her. It was what her grandmother had called her. How could he know? You're sent, he explained, as if reading her thoughts. It's unusual. Not quite wolf, not quite something else. Like shadows given form. It's unique. He pushed himself up, wincing, and moved toward the window, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to paint the sky gray. They'll come with the full light, he said quietly. My enemies. They'll search every inch of these borderlands until they find proof of my death or evidence I survived. Your cottage won't stay hidden forever. Elara's chest tightened. 6 years. 6 years of peace, of solitude, of safety. And in one night, she'd thrown it all away by being too soft-hearted to let a stranger die. She moved to her supply shelf and began packing quickly, efficiently. Herbs, bandages, the few precious possessions she owned. If she had to run again, she'd be ready. Or, Theron said, and she heard him move behind her, felt his presence at her back like a wall of barely contained fire. You could come with me, to the sanctuary, under my protection. Elara spun to face him, shaking her head vehemently. The last thing she needed was an alpha's protection. That's what had gotten her throat slit and cast out in the first place. I know what you're thinking, Theron said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. That protection from an alpha means chains, that I'll demand payment, that you'll trade one prison for another. His gold eyes held hers. But I'm not those wolves. The ones who hurt you, who cast you out, they weren't true alphas. They were bullies hiding behind titles. And you're different? Her hands asked the question she couldn't voice. Yes, he said simply. I am, because I've lived long enough to understand that true strength isn't breaking those weaker than you. It's protecting them, valuing them, learning from them. A howl split the dawn close, too close. Theron's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body tensing. They're here, he breathed. They tracked me faster than I expected. Elara's heart hammered. There was no time to pack properly, no time to cover her tracks. She grabbed her grandmother's pendant, her medical supplies, and a small knife pathetically inadequate against werewolf assassins. But it was all she had. Theron moved to the door, peering through a crack in the wood. 5 of them, he reported. All in wolf form, all wearing silver collars. Mercenaries. He glanced back at her, and for the first time since she'd found him, he looked uncertain. I can't fight 5, not in my condition. And I won't let them take you. The certainty in that last statement made something twist in Elara's chest. He barely knew her. Why would he care what happened to one mute, cast out Omega? Another howl, answered by 4 others in a hunting pattern. They were circling, cutting off escape routes. There's a back way. Elara moved quickly, pulling aside a woven mat to reveal a trapdoor she'd installed in her first year here, paranoia paying off. It leads to the ravine network. We can lose them in the caves. Theron looked at the trapdoor, then at her. You've been preparing to run since the day you arrived here. It wasn't a question, and she didn't deny it. Of course she'd been preparing. Survival meant always having an escape plan. Lead the way, he said, but take this first. He reached up to his neck, where a pendant hung on a leather cord, a wolf's head carved from black stone, with eyes of the same gold as his own. He pulled it off and held it out to her. This marks you as under royal protection, he explained. Any wolf who sees it will know to leave you alone, or answer to me. Elara stared at the pendant, at the power it represented. Accepting it would mean accepting his protection, his interference in her life. It would mean no longer being alone. But the alternative was being torn apart by mercenaries in the next few minutes. She took the pendant, and the moment it settled around her neck, something shifted. A warmth spread through her chest, not physical but somehow deeper, like a door opening in a wall she hadn't known existed. Theron's eyes widened. You feel it. She did feel it, a connection, gossamer thin but undeniable. Awareness of him that hadn't been there before, as if part of her consciousness had expanded to include his presence. Interesting, he murmured. Then louder. Urgent. We need to move. Now. The sound of claws on wood. They were at the door. Elara dropped through the trapdoor, landing in the tunnel below. Theron followed, despite his injuries, despite the way the drop made him bite back a sound of pain. She pulled the trapdoor shut above them just as the cottage door exploded inward. The tunnel was narrow, dark, barely wide enough to crawl through, but Elara knew every inch of it. She'd dug it herself. Over months of work, had memorized every turn, every potential collapse point. She moved forward quickly, hearing Theron behind her, hearing above them the sounds of the mercenaries tearing her cottage apart. She was here, a rough voice growled. Scent is fresh. A female, alone. Search the area, another commanded. She can't have gone far. But they wouldn't find the trapdoor. Elara had hidden it too well, had learned from 6 years of evading pack hunters who occasionally ventured into the borderlands. She'd learned to be invisible, untraceable. They crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, until the tunnel opened into a larger cave system. Here, Elara finally stopped, listening for sounds of pursuit. Nothing but dripping water and their own ragged breathing. Theron slumped against the cave wall, his face pale in the dim light filtering from cracks above. The exertion had reopened his wounds, and blood seeped through the bandages again. Elara moved to him immediately, checking the damage. Not catastrophic, but not good. He needed rest, proper medical attention. But they couldn't stop here. The mercenaries would eventually find the tunnel entrance. We need to keep moving, her hand said, even though he couldn't understand. But Theron caught her wrist gently. Wait, he said, his voice strained. I need to tell you something before we go further. She waited, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with their flight. "Those mercenaries," he said slowly. "They're not just hunting me. They're hunting for something I carry. Information about the old bloodlines, about wolves like you." "Like her?" Elara's brow furrowed in confusion. "Shadow speakers," Theron explained. "Wolves born with the ability to move through darkness, to become invisible, to speak without words. Your grandmother was one. That's why she taught you those signs, why she told you your silence was your shield. She was preparing you." Elara's hand went to her grandmother's iron pendant, her mind reeling. Her grandmother had been special? Had been hunted? "The ruling alphas fear shadow speakers," Theron continued, "because you can't be controlled through the usual means. Alpha commands don't work. Pack bonds can't chain you. You're outside the hierarchy, and that makes you dangerous." His gold eyes held hers. "But it also makes you invaluable, because there are things happening in the territories, dark things, secret things, that only a shadow speaker could uncover. Is that why you need me?" Her hands moved angrily. "Because I'm useful?" "I need you," Theron said quietly. "Because the moment you saved my life, you became a target. And because—" He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his ancient face. "Because in 300 years, I've never felt a bond form as instantly as it did when you put that pendant around your neck, which should be impossible." Elara's breath caught. She'd felt it too, that strange connection, like two puzzle pieces sliding together. But bonds took time to form, took multiple interactions, mutual trust. They didn't just appear overnight between strangers. "There's a prophecy," Theron said, and now he looked almost uncomfortable. "From the old times, about a shadow speaker and a king of wolves, about a bond that would reshape the pack hierarchies. I never believed it. Prophecies are just stories. Frightened wolves tell themselves." He met her eyes. "But stories have a way of becoming real when you least expect them." A sound echoed from the tunnel behind them, voices, getting closer. The mercenaries had found the entrance. "We're out of time." Theron pushed himself to his feet, swaying. "Can you guide us through these caves? To the sanctuary?" Elara looked at him, this impossible alpha king, bleeding and broken but still standing, still trying to protect her. She thought about her grandmother's words, about 6 years of running and hiding, about the pendant warm against her throat. She'd spent so long being invisible, being silent, being nothing. Maybe it was time to be something else. Elara nodded once, firmly. Then she took his hand, the first time she'd willingly touched another wolf in 6 years, and led him deeper into the darkness, toward a future she couldn't see but somehow knew she was meant to find. Behind them, the mercenaries' howls echoed through the caves, and above them, dawn broke over the borderlands, painting the world in shades of blood and promise. The cave system was a labyrinth of memories. Elara had explored these tunnels for 6 years, mapping them in her mind during the long winter months when venturing above ground meant freezing to death. She knew which passages led to dead ends, which opened to the surface in exposed clearings, which were home to things best left undisturbed. The mercenaries' voices faded behind them as she led Theron deeper, taking turns that seemed random but followed a pattern only she understood. Left at the fork where water trickled down in silver streams, right where the cave ceiling dropped low enough to scrape against even her modest height. Straight through the chamber where hundreds of tiny crystal formations caught the bioluminescent moss light and scattered it like stars. Theron followed without question, his hand still clasped in hers. She could feel his strength waning with each step, could hear his breathing grow more labored. The poison was mostly neutralized, but the wounds and the exertion were taking their toll. Even an alpha king had limits. After an hour of winding descent, Elara finally stopped in a small chamber where an underground spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a pool of crystal-clear water. The air here was warmer, heated by some deep geothermal source, and the space was hidden behind a narrow crevice that looked impassable until you knew the trick of turning sideways and sliding through. "We can rest here," Theron said, reading her intention, though she hadn't signed anything. "They won't find this place easily." Elara guided him to sit beside the spring, then immediately set about checking his bandages. In the soft glow of the moss that carpeted the walls, she could see how pale he'd become, how his jaw was clenched against pain he refused to show. She worked in silence, her hands gentle but efficient as she cleaned his wounds with the spring water and applied fresh poultices from her dwindling supplies. This close, She could see the other scars that marked his body, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one a story of survival, of battles won, of prices paid. "You're wondering how old I really am," Theron said quietly, watching her trace the path of a particularly vicious scar that ran from his left shoulder down to his ribs. "The answer is older than I should be, older than most wolves can comprehend." Elara's hands paused on his skin. She looked up at him, question clear in her silver eyes. "I was born before the Great Division," he explained, "when all wolves ran together under the first moon, before alphas and omegas, before the hierarchy. We were just wolves." Something ancient and sad moved through his expression. "But power corrupts. Always. Some wolves wanted to rule others, wanted to establish dominance, and so the pack structures were born alphas at the top, omegas at the bottom. A system designed to keep some wolves powerful and others powerless." He winced as she pressed too hard on a tender spot, but continued. "I fought against it, tried to preserve the old ways, but I was young, idealistic. I thought I could change minds through example, through reason." His laugh was bitter. "I learned quickly that those who benefit from injustice rarely give up their advantages willingly." Elara sat back on her heels, listening. No one had ever spoken to her like this, like she was worthy of hearing their history, their pain. Most wolves treated her as if her muteness made her deaf and stupid as well. "I was forced to play their game," Theron continued. "Became an alpha because that was the only way to have influence. Rose through the ranks until I was strong enough to challenge for the title of Alpha King, and I won." His gold eyes met hers. "But winning meant accepting a role in the very system I despised. It meant becoming part of the hierarchy I'd fought against." "Then why did you do it?" Her hands moved without thinking, the question desperate to be asked even though he couldn't understand. But somehow, impossibly, Theron's eyes tracked the movement of her fingers. He watched each gesture, each sign, and when she finished he said, "Because someone on the inside could do more good than someone shouting from the outside. Because I hoped I could change things from within." Elara's hands froze mid-air. He'd understood. He'd understood her signs, her private language that no one else knew. Theron smiled at her shock. "Shadow speakers don't just move through darkness, little shadow. They speak in silence. It's not a language I can fully interpret yet, but the bond between us." He touched the pendant at her throat, the one that matched his own. "It's translating, showing me what you mean to say." The implications of that crashed over Elara like a wave. A bond strong enough to bridge language. A connection deep enough to translate intention into understanding. This wasn't just unusual, it was unheard of. "What does this mean?" Her hands trembled as they formed the question. "It means," Theron said carefully, "that the prophecy might be more than just a story. It means you and I are connected in ways I don't fully understand yet. And it means that the mercenaries hunting me aren't just after information, they're trying to prevent something. Something that begins with you and me." A distant howl echoed through the caves, reminding them that danger was still close. "We should sleep while we can," Theron said, though his eyes remained alert, watchful. "Dawn is breaking above ground, but here in the deep caves, time moves differently. We'll need our strength for the journey ahead." Elara knew he was right, but the idea of sleeping near him, near any alpha, made anxiety spike through her chest. The last time she'd been vulnerable near an alpha, she'd woken to find him forcing a bond she didn't want, his teeth at her throat. "I won't touch you," Theron said quietly, and she realized her fear must have shown on her face. "I give you my word, on the first moon and the old ways. You are under my protection, not my possession. There is a difference." She wanted to believe him. The bond between them hummed with something that felt like truth, like safety. But 6 years of survival had taught her not to trust easily. Still, exhaustion was pulling at her, and her options were limited. Elara moved to the far side of the small chamber, curling up against the warm stone with her medical bag clutched to her chest like a shield. Across the space, Theron settled himself facing the entrance, positioning his body between her and any threat that might find them. The gesture, protective without being possessive, made something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the distant sounds of pursuit and Elara's own nightmares. She dreamed of the night she'd fled Ashwood Pack, of Alpha's son Marcus pinning her down, of her grandmother's iron pendant burning hot against her skin, as she'd bitten down hard enough to taste blood, then run. She woke with a start to find the chamber darker. Some of the moss had dimmed with the passing hours. Theron sat exactly where she'd last seen him, though his head had drooped forward in exhausted sleep. Even in rest, tension lined his shoulders, as if some part of him remained on guard. Elara studied him in the dim light, this impossible creature who claimed to be an alpha king from before the hierarchies existed. She could see the truth of his age in the set of his bones, in the layered scars, in the weight of centuries that hung around him like a cloak. Why did you really answer my call? She signed the question to herself, knowing he wouldn't hear it in sleep. What do you want from me? Everything, Theron murmured, and her breath caught he wasn't fully asleep after all. His eyes opened, those burning gold irises finding her in the darkness. And nothing. I want you to be free. I want you to be safe. He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his face. I want not to be alone anymore. The raw honesty in those words struck her like a physical blow. She'd thought herself the lonely one 6 years in isolation, believing no one would ever want or understand her. But he'd been alone for centuries, playing a role in a system he hated, surrounded by wolves who feared or wanted to use him. You're not alone, her hand said softly. Not anymore. His smile was sad and beautiful. Neither are you, little shadow. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something neither could name. Then sound shattered at voices echoing from the main passage, getting closer. Tracks lead this way. The female must have taken him deeper. Silver collars ready. The buyer wants him alive if possible, but dead is acceptable. And the female, dead. She's seen too much, knows too much, no witnesses. Theron was on his feet instantly. Every trace of exhaustion vanished beneath Predator's alertness. He moved to the crevice entrance, peering through, then turned back to Elara with grim determination. 3 of them, 30 feet out. The others must have split off to search other passages. His voice was barely a whisper. We need to move, but there's only one way out of this chamber, and they're between us and it. Elara's mind raced. She knew these caves, but this chamber truly was a dead end. She'd chosen it for that reason, because nothing could sneak up behind them. Now that advantage had become a trap. I can get us past them. Her hands moved quickly. But you have to trust me. Theron's eyes searched hers. I do trust you. What do you need? She stood and moved to the spring, gesturing for him to follow. The water was deep here, fed by underground channels. She'd explored them once, had nearly drowned in the process, but she'd found something, a way through. Hold your breath, she signed. Follow me exactly. Don't let go of my hand. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by concern. You want us to swim through? Elara, I'm wounded. I don't know if I can... She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Then she took his hand and stepped into the spring. The water was warm, almost hot, heated by the volcanic activity deep below. She pulled him in after her, and together they sank beneath the surface. The underwater passage was narrow, winding, disorienting in the complete darkness. But Elara had memorized it through trial and error, had learned to navigate by touch and instinct. She pulled Theron through, feeling him struggle against his wounds, feeling his grip on her hand tighten to nearly painful intensity. Her lungs burned. The passage seemed longer than she remembered. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd made a wrong turn, that they'd drowned down here in the dark. Then her head broke the surface, and she gasped in precious air. Beside her, Theron emerged, coughing, his face twisted with pain. His wounds had reopened. She could see blood clouding the water around them. They'd surfaced in another chamber, smaller than the first, but with multiple exits. Behind them, muffled by water and stone, she could hear the mercenaries entering the chamber they'd just abandoned. She's not here. Check the spring, maybe they drowned trying to escape. Waste of time. No wolf could hold their breath long enough to swim through these passages. They're blocked off. Then where? Spread out. Search every tunnel. They can't have gone far. Elara pulled Theron from the water, supporting him as he swayed. His wounds were worse now, the exertion and the cold water undoing hours of healing. He needed rest, proper medical care, not more running, but they didn't have a choice. She led him through a series of connecting passages, moving as quickly as his condition allowed. Every few minutes, she stopped to listen, to make sure they weren't being followed. The mercenaries were thorough, methodical. They'd find them eventually. The sanctuary, Theron said through gritted teeth as they paused in yet another chamber. How far? Elara held up 3 fingers, then pointed up. 3 days, and we need to get back to the surface. He nodded, leaning heavily against the cave wall. Can you get us there? She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise him safety, but the truth was, she'd never been that far north. The borderlands were vast, and she'd only explored a fraction of them. Getting to the sanctuary would mean traveling through territory she didn't know, facing dangers she couldn't predict. I don't know, her hands admitted. Then we'll learn together. Theron straightened with visible effort, his hand reaching for hers again. The touch sent that strange warmth through her, that connection that shouldn't exist but did. Lead on, little shadow. I'll follow wherever you go. The trust in his words was absolute. Terrifying. He was putting his life in her hands, an alpha king trusting a mute, cast-out Omega, to guide him through hostile territory. It went against every hierarchy rule, every pack law. It was insane. It was also the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. Elara squeezed his hand once, then led him onward, deeper into the mountain's heart. The caves here were older, stranger. The rock formations took on unnatural shapes, too precise to be natural, too ancient to be recent. Carvings covered some walls, symbols she didn't recognize, telling stories in a language lost to time. The old ones marked these caves, Theron said, running his free hand over the carvings. Before wolves walked upright, before we learned to shift. These were sacred places. They passed through a chamber where the ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, where stalactites hung like frozen tears, and their footsteps echoed forever. Through a tunnel so narrow they had to turn sideways and shuffle, through a cavern where blind white creatures skittered away from their presence, things that had never seen the sun, that had evolved in the deep dark. Hours passed, maybe days. Time lost meaning in the caves. Elara's supplies dwindled to almost nothing. Theron grew weaker, though he refused to admit it, refused to slow down. The mercenaries' pursuit became sporadic, sometimes close enough that they could hear voices, sometimes so distant it seemed they'd given up. They hadn't given up. Elara knew predators, knew how they hunted. The mercenaries were herding them, pushing them toward something. She realized it too late. They emerged into a massive cavern, the largest Elara had ever seen. It stretched so far the walls disappeared into darkness, and the ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center, a stone circle stood like frozen sentinels' pillars, carved with the same ancient symbols they'd seen throughout the caves. The sanctuary? Theron breathed. We found it. But this is impossible. It should be 3 days north, not directly beneath us. Because I led you here, a voice echoed from the darkness, and figures emerged from multiple passages surrounding them. Not just the 5 mercenaries, but dozens of wolves. An ambush, perfectly laid. Leading them was a wolf. Elara recognized instantly. His face was burned into her memory, into her nightmares. Marcus, the Ashwood Pack's heir, the one she'd scarred when she'd refused his bond, the one who'd sworn to kill her for the humiliation. Hello, Elara, Marcus said, his smile cold and cruel. Did you miss me? I've certainly missed you. Been hunting for 6 years, waiting for you to make a mistake. His eyes shifted to Theron. And you rescued the Alpha King. Led us right to him. Theron moved in front of Elara, shielding her despite his wounds. Marcus Ashwood, your father sent word you'd joined the mercenary guilds. Disgrace to your pack, if I recall correctly. Disgrace? Marcus laughed. I left because the pack laws are weak, because alphas like my father care more about honor than power. His hand went to his throat, where Elara's teeth had left permanent scars. Because they let Omegas refuse their betters and go unpunished. She wasn't yours to claim. Theron's voice dropped to something dangerous. No Omega is property. That's where you're wrong, old king. That's always been your weakness, this pathetic belief in equality. Marcus gestured to the wolves surrounding them. We've been hired by the true alphas, the ones who understand that hierarchy exists for a reason, the ones who want you dead and your progressive ideas buried with you. Theron's body tensed. The Alpha Council. What's left of it? Yes. You've made too many changes, freed too many Omegas, questioned too many traditions. They want the old ways back, and they're willing to pay handsomely for your death. Elara's mind raced, counting opponents. 30, maybe 40 wolves, all armed with silver weapons. Even at full strength, Theron couldn't fight that many. Wounded as he was, they'd be slaughtered in seconds. The stone circle, her hands moved frantically. Get to the stone circle. Theron glanced at the ancient pillars, understanding flickering in his eyes. Sacred ground, protected by old magic. If they could reach it, kill the female first, Marcus ordered. Let him watch her die, knowing he failed to protect her. The mercenaries surged forward, and Theron exploded into motion. Despite his wounds, despite the exhaustion, he shifted mid-leap, becoming that massive black wolf Elara had first found bleeding in the ravine. His jaws caught the first mercenary, crushing through the silver collar, through flesh and bone. But there were too many. For every one he fought off, 3 more closed in. Elara ran, not away from the fight, but toward the stone circle, toward the ancient magic her grandmother had once told her about in whispered stories. Sacred places choose who enters, her grandmother had said, not by strength, but by heart. Elara reached the pillars and stumbled between them, feeling the shift in the air immediately. Power here, old and vast, humming like a living thing. She turned back to see Theron surrounded, see his black coat matted with new wounds, see Marcus moving in for the kill with a silver blade raised high. She did the only thing she could do, the thing her grandmother had warned her never to do where others could hear. Elara sang. The sound that emerged from her scarred throat wasn't quite a voice. It was broken, fractured, painful. But it was hers, the first sound she'd made in 6 years, and it echoed through the cavern like thunder. Every wolf froze, not from alpha command, but from shock. The mute Omega was singing, and the sacred stones were answering. The pillars began to glow, pulsing with silver light in rhythm with Elara's damaged voice. The ancient symbols carved into them blazed to life, and power rushed through the cavern like a flood. Theron used the distraction to break free, to run not away from Elara, but toward her, toward the sanctuary of the stone circle. He crossed the threshold between the pillars just as Marcus lunged after him. Marcus hit an invisible barrier, and was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. The other mercenaries tried to follow and met the same fate the stone circle had activated, had sealed itself with Theron and Elara inside. Impossible, Marcus snarled, pushing himself up. Shadow speakers can't sing. Your throat was cut. You were silenced. But Elara kept singing, kept pouring everything she was into the fractured melody. It hurt. Every note felt like swallowing glass. But the stones responded, growing brighter, and the barrier between them and the mercenaries grew stronger. Theron shifted back to human form, his hand finding hers. The moment their skin touched, something incredible happened. His voice joined hers deep and resonant, where hers was broken and high. Together, their voices harmonized, creating something that was more than either could achieve alone. The stone circle erupted with light, and the ancient magic that had slept here for millennia woke fully. The cavern began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling. The mercenaries scattered, running for the exits as the entire mountain seemed to wake from a long dream. In the chaos, Elara's voice gave out, her throat unable to sustain the effort. She collapsed, and Theron caught her, lowering them both to the ground within the circle's protection. The light began to fade, settling into a gentle glow that pulsed in time with their heartbeats. You sang, Theron whispered, his arms cradling her against his chest. You broke 6 years of silence for me. Elara tried to speak, to tell him it wasn't just for him, but her throat was fire and ice and agony. She'd torn something, maybe permanently. The price of magic was always steep. But as the last of the mercenaries fled and silence fell over the cavern, Elara realized she didn't regret it. She'd found her voice broken and imperfect as it was, and used it to save both their lives. And in Theron's eyes, as he looked down at her with something like awe and something like love, she saw that. It had been worth every ounce of pain. The stone circle's magic settled around them like a living thing, pulsing with ancient warmth that seemed to seep into Elara's bones. The barrier between them and the outside world shimmered faintly visible if she looked at it from the corner of her eye, invisible if she stared directly at it. Beyond it, the cavern lay empty. The mercenaries had fled when the mountain woke, their greed overcome by self-preservation. But they'd be back. Men like Marcus didn't give up. especially not when humiliation was added to failure. Theron hadn't moved, still holding Elara against his chest as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her ear, could feel the tremors running through his body, exhaustion and blood loss, finally catching up to him now that the immediate danger had passed. She pushed weakly at his shoulder, trying to tell him he needed to let her tend his wounds, but her throat was too damaged to make even the smallest sound. The act of singing had cost her dearly. Where before she'd had silence, now she had pain, a constant burning reminder of what she'd sacrificed. "Don't try to talk," Theron said softly, though his arms loosened enough to let her move. "The damage. I can smell the blood. You tore something vital." Elara met his eyes and saw the guilt there, the self-recrimination. He blamed himself for this, for her injury. She shook her head firmly, then reached up to touch his face, a gesture meant to reassure, to tell him it had been her choice. His hand covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. "You saved us both, but the price." She pulled her hand away and signed quickly. "Worth it. Now let me work." Whether he understood the full meaning or just the intention didn't matter. He released her and sat back, allowing her to assess his condition. It was worse than she'd feared. The wounds from the worm attack had reopened during the fight, and new ones had been added: claw marks across his ribs, a deep gash on his thigh, bite marks on his shoulder. Silver poisoning from the mercenaries' weapons had begun to creep through his system again, turning the edges of his wounds a sickly gray. Her medical supplies were nearly gone. A few crushed herbs at the bottom of her bag, some bandages that had gotten soaked when they'd swum through the underground passage. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to treat injuries this severe. Elara looked around the stone circle desperately, hoping to find something, anything, that could help. The pillars themselves seemed to watch her, their ancient symbols pulsing with that steady silver light. Between them, growing in the cracks of the stone floor, she noticed plants she'd never seen before. Their leaves were silver white, almost luminescent, and they grew in perfect circles around each pillar. Moon sage, her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. The rarest herb, grows only in places touched by the panis, first moon's light, can heal any wound, cure any poison, but you must ask permission before you take it. The old places don't give their gifts freely. Ask permission. How was she supposed to ask when she couldn't speak? But even as the thought formed, Elara realized she didn't need words. The stone circle had responded to her song, had recognized something in her that went deeper than voice. She moved to the nearest pillar and placed her palm flat against its surface. The stone was warm, almost alive beneath her touch. Energy thrummed through it, not threatening, but curious, as if the ancient magic was assessing her, judging her worth. She closed her eyes and tried to communicate without words, pushing her intention toward the intelligence she could feel dwelling within the stones. "Please, he's dying. I need your help to save him." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then warmth flooded up her arm from the stone, and the symbols carved into the pillar blazed brighter. The moon sage, plants began to grow, spreading faster than any natural plant should, their silver leaves multiplying until they carpeted the floor around each pillar. "Take what you need," a voice that wasn't quite a voice whispered in her mind. "But remember, all gifts come with price. All magic demands balance." Elara opened her eyes to find Theron staring at the transformed circle in wonder. "The sanctuary accepted you," he said, his voice rough with something between awe and disbelief. "In 300 years, I've never seen it respond to anyone like that." She didn't have time to contemplate what that meant. She gathered the moon sage quickly, crushing it between her palms to release its essence. The scent that rose was incredible, like moonlight made tangible, like the space between stars, like every peaceful night she'd ever known distilled into pure fragrance. Working quickly, she created a paste and applied it to Theron's wounds. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The gray tinge of silver poisoning retreated, the torn flesh began to knit together, and color returned to his face. Within minutes, injuries that should have taken days to heal were reduced to pink scars. "Remarkable," Theron breathed, watching his body repair itself. "I've heard stories of moon sage, but I thought it was extinct, that the last of it died with the sacred groves when they were burned during the Great Division." Elara continued working, spreading the paste over every injury she could find. When she was satisfied that he was stable, she sat back on her heels and found him studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You have a gift with healing," he said quietly. Your grandmother taught you? She nodded. And yet the Ashwood pack cast you out for being defective. His mouth twisted with contempt. They had a treasure and threw it away because it didn't fit their narrow definition of value. They wanted me to submit. Her hands moved. To accept their hierarchy, without question. When I couldn't, wouldn't I became disposable. Theron's eyes tracked her signing, the bond between them translating her meaning. You were never disposable. You were inconvenient. There's a difference. The hierarchy can only function when everyone accepts their place in it, when someone refuses to bow, when they prove that the system isn't natural or inevitable. They become dangerous. They become a threat to the entire structure. He reached out and touched the scars on her throat with infinite gentleness. They tried to silence you permanently. But even silence can be a form of speech, can't it? 6 years alone in the borderlands, surviving what should have killed you, that's its own kind of defiance. Its own kind of voice. Elara's breath caught. No one had ever understood that before. Everyone saw her muteness as pure disability, pure loss. But Theron saw it as she did as a different way of existing in the world. Neither better nor worse than speaking, just different. The stone circle recognized that, Theron continued, his thumb tracing the line of one scar. It responded to your song not despite its brokenness, but because of it. Because you understand that strength and wholeness aren't the same thing. That you can be damaged and still be powerful. Before Elara could respond, the barrier around them flickered. Both their heads snapped toward it, bodies tensing for another attack. But it wasn't the mercenaries returning. 3 figures approached from the main tunnel, 2 women and a man, all walking with the confident grace of wolves who knew their power. They stopped at the barrier's edge, and the eldest of the women, silver-haired, with eyes the color of smoke, bowed her head respectfully. Alpha King Theron, she called out, her voice carrying across the cavern. We are the sanctuary keepers. We felt the awakening of the old magic, and came to investigate. Theron stood, moving to the barrier's edge with Elara close behind. To him, the barrier will not let you pass unless the sanctuary permits it. We know, the woman replied. We've been keepers for 3 generations, but we've never seen the stones respond with such force. Not since. She trailed off, her eyes fixing on Elara with sudden intense interest. A shadow speaker. Here in the sanctuary. The prophecy stirs. What prophecy? Theron demanded, though Elara noticed his hand had moved to rest protectively at the small of her back. Speak plainly, Keeper. I've had enough of riddles and mysteries. The woman's gaze never left Elara. May we approach? We mean no harm, and we have knowledge you'll need if you're to survive what's coming. Theron looked at Elara, the question clear in his eyes. Your choice. The sanctuary responded to you. Its permission is yours to grant or deny. Elara studied the 3 keepers carefully. They wore simple robes of undyed wool, carried no weapons she could see, and their scents carried no trace of deception or malice. More importantly, something about the silver-haired woman felt familiar, though Elara was certain they'd never met. She nodded once, and the barrier shimmered, creating an opening large enough for the 3 keepers to pass through. They entered reverently, their movements careful, as if walking on sacred ground, which, Elara supposed, they were. My name is Morgana, the silver-haired woman said. These are my fellow keepers, Kale and Iris. We've protected this sanctuary for 50 years, waiting for the prophecy to manifest. She turned to Elara, and there was something like wonder in her ancient eyes. We never dreamed we'd live to see it. Enough mystery. Theron's voice held the edge of command that marked him as Alpha King, bond or no bond. Tell us plainly what prophecy you speak of and why it concerns Elara. Morgana gestured toward the stone pillars. May I show you? The stones remember better than any written record could preserve. At Elara's nod, Morgana moved to the central pillar and placed both palms against it. The symbols blazed to life again, but this time they began to move, flowing like liquid light, forming images in the air above them. Elara watched, mesmerized, as the light showed wolves, not modern wolves, but the first ones, the ones who'd walked in the time before the Great Division. They ran together, hunted together, lived together without hierarchy or rank. It was beautiful, pure, the way things were meant to be. Then the images shifted, showing the rise of the first Alpha, the first Omega, showing how pack structure formed, how hierarchy became law, how those deemed weak were cast aside. The light showed suffering omegas beaten into submission, shadow speakers hunted to near extinction, any wolf who didn't fit the perfect mold destroyed or exiled. The hierarchy was a corruption, Morgana's voice narrated softly, a perversion of what wolves were meant to be. And the first moon wept for her children, scattered and broken. The images shifted again, showing a shadow speaker and a king of wolves standing together in a stone circle exactly like this one. Between them, light and shadow merged, creating something new, something that shattered the old structures and rebuilt them into something better. The prophecy says that when hierarchy has reached its darkest corruption, Morgana continued, when the system has become so broken that it threatens to destroy all wolves, a shadow speaker will rise. She will bond with a king, and together they will reshape the pack laws, will restore what was lost in the Great Division. The images faded, leaving them in the gentle glow of the stones. Elara's mind reeled. A prophecy. About her. About Theron. About changing everything. That's impossible, Theron said, but his voice lacked conviction. Prophecies are stories. Wishful thinking given weight by desperate wolves. Are they? Kale, the male keeper, spoke for the first time. Or are they patterns? Inevitabilities written into the fabric of how magic works? The sanctuary chose her. He gestured to Elara. It gave her moon sage, responded to her broken song, created a barrier that's held for hours when normally it would have faded in minutes. These aren't random occurrences, Alpha King. This is destiny recognizing itself. Elara's hands moved before she could stop them. I don't want to be a prophecy. I just want to survive. Morgana's expression softened with understanding. I know, child, but sometimes survival and prophecy are the same thing. The mercenaries who hunted you, they weren't just after the Alpha King. They were after you. Because the old guard, the ones who benefit from the hierarchy's corruption, they fear what you represent. They've been hunting shadow speakers for generations, trying to prevent this exact moment. Marcus mentioned the Alpha Council hired them, Theron said grimly. What's left of the council? 3 alphas remain loyal to the old ways. Iris, the third keeper, said. She was younger than the others, with hair like autumn leaves and eyes that held too much knowledge. Arcturus, Bloodmoon, Severin, Ironjaw, and Ragnar Shadowfang. They command significant resources and wolf packs that still cling to the traditional hierarchy. When they learned you were reforming the pack laws, Alpha King, they began planning your assassination. And when rumors began to circulate of a shadow speaker in the borderlands, Morgana added, looking at Elara, they sent Marcus Ashwood to find and eliminate her before she could manifest her full power. So this has all been orchestrated, Theron said slowly, pieces clicking into place. The worm attack that nearly killed me that wasn't random. The assassins knew my patrol route, knew when I'd be vulnerable. Your beta sold you out, Kale confirmed. Garrick took coin from the Alpha Council. He's been feeding them information for months. Rage flashed across Theron's face, not the hot anger of impulse, but the cold fury of a king betrayed. When I return to the Northern Territories, Garrick will answer for his treachery. If you return, Morgana said gently. Alpha King, your wounds are healed, but your strength is depleted. The magic Elara used to save you has drained her own life force. That's the price Moonsage demands. And the barrier will not hold forever. Already I can feel it weakening as the sanctuary's power returns to dormancy. As if to emphasize her words, the silver glow of the pillars dimmed slightly. The barrier flickered again, more noticeably this time. How long? Theron asked. Hours, perhaps a day at most, Morgana replied. Then you'll both be vulnerable again. And Marcus will have gathered reinforcements by now. He knows you're trapped here, knows he just has to wait for the barrier to fall. Then we break out before it falls, Theron said, his tactical mind clearly working. Catch them unprepared, fight our way through. You'd be slaughtered, Iris said bluntly. There are at least 50 mercenaries surrounding this cavern now, all armed with silver. Even at full strength, you couldn't fight that many. And she nodded at Elara, has no combat training. She'd die in the first minutes of fighting. The casual assessment of Elara's inadequacy stung, but she couldn't deny its truth. She was a healer, not a warrior. She'd never been taught to fight, had spent 6 years avoiding conflict, rather than seeking it. Then what do we do? Her hands formed the question desperately. Just wait here to die? No, Morgana said, and a smile curved her lips, something ancient and knowing. We teach you what your grandmother couldn't before she died. We wake your shadow speaker gifts fully, and we give the Alpha King time to recover his strength. The sanctuary can sustain the barrier for another day if we help it. One day to prepare for what comes next. And what comes next? Theron asked. Morgana's expression turned grave. War. The Alpha Council won't stop with assassins and mercenaries. When they learn you've survived, they'll bring armies. They'll burn the borderlands to ash to prevent the prophecy from manifesting. She looked between Theron and Elara. But if you bond completely, if you allow the Shadow Speaker and King connection to fully form, you'll have power the Council can't match. You'll be able to challenge the hierarchy itself. Elara's breath caught. Bond completely. She understood what that meant, not just the pendant's connection, not just the translation of her signs into meaning. A true mate bond, the kind that linked souls, that made two wolves into one unified force, the kind that could never be broken, even by death. She looked at Theron and found him already watching her, gold eyes intense with question and something deeper, something that had been growing between them since the moment she'd first found him bleeding in the ravine. It would be your choice, he said, softly, for her ears alone. Always your choice. I won't force a bond you don't want. Won't become another Marcus trying to claim what isn't freely given. How do you know I don't want it? Her hands moved before her brain could catch up with her heart. Surprise flickered across his features, followed by hope so raw it hurt to witness. You barely know me. We've spent less than 2 days together. That's not enough time to... She touched his face again, silencing him the way he'd silenced her doubts earlier. I know enough. I know you protected me when you could barely stand. I know you see me as more than defective. I know you want to change the world that broke us both. Her hands paused, trembling. I know I don't want to be alone anymore. And neither do you. Elara. Is the bond really a choice if we need it to survive? If it's the only way to fight the Council? To save the wolves they'll hurt next? Theron caught her hands gently, stilling their movement. Yes, he said fiercely. It's still a choice. Because you could walk away, could refuse the bond, refuse the prophecy, disappear back into the borderlands and let the world burn. That's always an option. His grip tightened. But I'm hoping I'm asking that you'll choose differently. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Elara looked into his ancient, beautiful, damaged eyes and saw her own reflection there. 2 broken wolves, cast aside by the system that should have protected them. 2 survivors who'd learned that strength came in forms the hierarchy couldn't recognize or measure. 2 halves of something that could reshape the world, if they were brave enough to try. She pulled one hand free from his grip and touched the pendant at her throat, his pendant, marking her as under his protection. Then she took it off and held it out to him. Confusion flickered across his face. Elara, what? She pressed the pendant into his palm, then signed clearly. I don't want your protection. I want your partnership, your equality. If we do this, if we bond, I need to know you see me as your equal, not your charge. Understanding dawned, followed by something that looked like love. Theron took the pendant, and instead of putting it back around her neck, he broke the leather cord in half. Then he took his own pendant off and did the same. Working quickly, he braided the 4 broken cords into 2 new ones, stronger than either had been alone. On each cord, he placed both pendants, his and hers, intertwined. Partners, he said, fastening one cord around her neck and handing her the other. Equals, 2 halves of one whole, neither more important than the other. Elara took the second cord and reached up to fasten it around his neck. Her fingers trembled as they brushed his skin, as the weight of what they were about to do fully settled over her. A true mate bond. Chosen freely, binding absolutely. The keepers had retreated to the edge of the circle, giving them privacy for this moment. Morgana called out softly, "When you're ready, place your palms together over your hearts. The sanctuary will do the rest." Theron extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Elara looked at it scarred, strong, offered without demand or expectation. Just offered, for her to take or leave as she chose. She placed her hand in his, and he drew them both against his chest, over his heart. She covered their joined hands with her free hand, pressing against her own heart. Between them, the pendants glowed silver and gold light merging, pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats. The stone pillars blazed to life, brighter than they'd been even during her song. Power rushed through the circle, through Elara's body, through the point where her skin touched Theron's. It felt like lightning and honey, like falling and flying, like every nerve ending igniting with sensation. She gasped, or tried to, but her damaged throat wouldn't cooperate. Instead, something else happened. Her consciousness expanded outward, crashing into Theron's, and suddenly she wasn't alone inside her own head anymore. She felt his emotions as if they were her own, the fierce protectiveness he felt for her, the guilt over her injuries, the hope that had been dormant for centuries now blazing to life. She felt his exhaustion, his pain, his determination. She felt the weight of 300 years of loneliness, of playing a role in a system he despised, of waiting for something to change, and he felt her fear and courage braided together, felt the grief for her grandmother that had never fully healed, felt the 6 years of isolation that had taught her both strength and sorrow, felt her desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who wouldn't try to break or remake her, but would simply accept her as she was. "I see you," his voice echoed in her mind, not words, but pure meaning. "All of you. Every scar, every fear, every strength. And you're magnificent. I see you too," she answered without words, without hands, without any barrier between them. "And you're not alone anymore. Never alone again." The bond snapped into place like a lock clicking home, like puzzle pieces finally aligned, like a song finding its missing harmony. Elara felt it settle deep in her chest, next to her heart, a warmth that hadn't been there before, a presence that was Theron but also herself, two identities merged without losing their individual essence. When the light faded and she could see again, she found herself pressed against Theron's chest, his arms wrapped around her, both of them trembling with the force of what they'd just experienced. "That," Theron said, his voice shaking with emotion, "was nothing like any bond I've ever felt or witnessed before." Morgana approached, reverence clear in her expression. "Because it's not just a mate bond. It's a shadow speaker and king bond, the kind that hasn't existed since before the Great Division. You're not just connected, you're synchronized. Her strengths become yours, and vice versa." Elara pulled back slightly to look up at Theron, and her breath caught. She could see him differently now, not just with her eyes, but with something deeper. She could see the threads of power that wound through him, could sense his strength and his vulnerabilities, could feel the bond between them thrumming like a living thing. And based on the wonder in his expression as he looked at her, he could see the same things. "Your shadow speaker gifts," Morgana said to Elara. "They're no longer dormant. The bond awakened them fully. Can you feel it?" Elara closed her eyes and reached for something she'd never quite been able to touch before: the darkness at the edges of firelight, the shadows in corners, the space between heartbeats. And for the first time in her life, they reached back. She could feel every shadow in the cavern, could sense their potential, their possibility. With barely a thought, she called them, and they answered. The shadows around her deepened, spread, began to move with intention rather than simply as absence of light. "By the first moon," Kale breathed. "She's a natural. It took most shadow speakers years to develop that level of control." "It's the bond," Iris said. "The Alpha King's strength is supplementing hers, teaching her instinctively what would have taken years of training." Theron's hand found Elara's again, squeezing gently. Through the bond, she felt his pride in her accomplishment, felt his own wonder at the power they now shared. "This is good," Morgana said, "because you're going to need every advantage. When the barrier falls tomorrow, you'll be facing the largest mercenary force Marcus has ever assembled. And beyond that, the Alpha Council itself will come. They'll see your completed bond as the ultimate threat. Let them come." Theron's voice carried the weight of command that marked him as king. "We've been running and hiding, but no more. It's time to fight back. Time to show the Council that the old ways are dying, whether they want them to or not." Together, Elara added through their bond, and Theron's smile was fierce and beautiful. "Together," he agreed aloud. "Partners, equals, and the beginning of something the hierarchy can't control or contain." As night fell above ground and the barrier around them flickered with fading strength, Elara leaned against Theron's side and felt, for the first time since her grandmother died, truly not alone. The battle ahead would be brutal. The odds were against them. The cost would be high. But she had her voice broken as it was. She had her power, newly awakened, and she had him, bound to her soul in ways that made strength multiply rather than divide. The prophecy had found them. Now they would decide what to make of it. Dawn broke above ground, painting the world in shades of blood and gold. Below, in the sanctuary's protected circle, Elara felt the moment the barrier began its final collapse. The ancient magic had sustained them through the night, but even the oldest power had limits. "They're moving into position," Theron said, his enhanced senses picking up what Elara couldn't yet hear. Through their bond, she felt his tactical assessment: 50, maybe 60 mercenaries, arranged in a kill formation designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Marcus is with them, and 3 others. Alphas, judging by their power signatures. "The council members," Elara signed, though with the bond, Theron understood before her hands finished moving. "They came personally. To witness my death, probably. To ensure the job is done right this time." His jaw clenched. "They're going to be disappointed." "They're going to be disappointed." Morgana and the other keepers had spent the night teaching Elara the basics of shadow manipulation. How to fold darkness around herself like a cloak. How to step through shadows and emerge elsewhere. How to use the spaces between light as weapons. Her grandmother's instinctive lessons combined with Theron's strength flowing through the bond had accelerated her learning impossibly fast. But fast wasn't the same as mastery, and mastery was what they'd need to survive. "There's something you should know," Kale said, approaching with Iris. Both keepers looked grave, worn from the night's efforts to sustain the barrier. The Alpha Council didn't just bring mercenaries, they brought a Shadowbreaker. Theron went rigid. "That's impossible. Shadowbreakers are extinct. The last one died in the Purge Wars." "Apparently not," Iris said quietly. "We can sense her out there. A witch, bound to their service. She can see through shadow walking, can dispel darkness, can make you visible no matter how well you hide." The news hit like a physical blow. Elara's newly awakened gifts, the advantage they'd counted on, would be useless against a Shadowbreaker. They'd be fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. "Then we don't rely on shadows alone," Elara signed, her mind racing. "We use everything. Your strength, my healing, the bond itself. The bond is powerful," Morgana warned, "but you've only had it for hours. You don't know its full capabilities yet. Using it in combat is dangerous. If one of you is badly hurt, the other will feel it. If one of you dies." She didn't need to finish. Elara understood. A mate bond meant that death for one was often death for both. Their souls were intertwined now. Severing that connection violently would destroy them. But living on her knees, hiding forever, watching the council hurt other wolves the way they'd hurt her, that was a death too. Just slower, more painful. "We fight," she signed firmly. "Whatever comes." Theron pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I won't let them take you. I won't let them hurt you again." Through the bond, she sent back determination and love in equal measure. "And I won't let them kill you. We protect each other. That's what partners do." The barrier flickered a final time, then shattered like glass, dissolving into motes of silver light that drifted away like snow. Immediately, the mercenaries surged forward, weapons drawn, moving with the coordinated precision of trained killers. "Now," Marcus's voice echoed through the cavern. "Take them both alive if possible. The council wants to make an example." Theron shifted instantly, his human form blurring into the massive black wolf Elara had first found dying in the ravine. But this time, he was whole, powerful, magnificent, 300 years of strength and skill made manifest. He hit the first wave of mercenaries like an avalanche, scattering them, buying precious seconds. Elara didn't waste them. She reached for the shadows, felt them respond eagerly to her call, and wrapped darkness around herself. Not to hide, as the keepers had taught her, but to become something else. The shadows merged with her body, transforming her from a small omega into something fluid and swift. Harder to catch, harder to kill. A mercenary lunged at where she'd been. She flowed around his blade like water, like smoke, and her hand touched his exposed neck. Moonsage paste, she'd prepared it during the night, coating her palms with it. On wounds, it healed. On healthy flesh, concentrated as this was, it paralyzed. The mercenary dropped, twitching, unable to control his limbs. Elara moved to the next, then the next, dancing through the chaos while Theron carved a path of destruction through their enemies. Through the bond, she felt his battle joy, his fierce protectiveness, his pride in her as she fought in her own way. And she sent back her own emotions, determination, courage, love that burned brighter than fear. There. A woman's voice cut through the noise, sharp, commanding. Wrong somehow. I see her. The shadows are an illusion. The shadow breaker. Elara felt the woman's magic slam into her like a hammer, stripping away her darkness, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in the middle of the battlefield. A blade flashed toward her throat. She barely dodged, feeling the silver edge graze her shoulder. Pain exploded through the wound. Silver burned shadow speakers worse than normal wolves, and through the bond, she felt Theron's roar of fury. He was at her side in an instant, his massive wolf form shielding her body. But that left his back exposed, and 3 mercenaries took advantage, silver blades sinking into his hindquarters. Elara felt his pain like her own, felt the poison beginning to work its way through his system. No, she thought desperately, her hands moving to his wounds even as enemies closed in around them. Not again. I won't lose you. How touching, a new voice said, cultured, cold, ancient. The mercenaries pulled back, forming a circle around Elara and Theron. 3 wolves stepped through the gap alphas, their power unmistakable. The Alpha Council members, the eldest, silver-furred with eyes like winter ice, studied them with detached interest. The prophecy made manifest. I confess, I didn't believe it possible. Shadow speakers were supposed to be extinct. You tried hard enough to make them so, Arcturus. Theron growled, shifting back to human form despite his wounds. He kept himself between Elara and the council members. How many did you kill? How many children? How many innocents? All because you feared what you couldn't control. Control is the foundation of civilization. The second Alpha Severin, massive and scarred, replied. Without hierarchy, without order, wolves would tear each other apart. We did what was necessary. You did what was profitable, Theron spat. The hierarchy keeps you powerful. That's all you've ever cared about. And you would tear it down. The third Alpha Ragnar, with dead eyes and ritual scars, said, You and your progressive reforms, your ideas of equality. You've poisoned an entire generation with the delusion that Omegas deserve the same rights as Alphas. We do. Elara signed, stepping out from behind Theron despite his growl of protest. We deserve to exist without fear, without being broken and cast aside for not fitting your perfect mold. She signs, Arcturus observed with clinical interest. How quaint, but defective nonetheless. A mute Omega who thinks herself equal to an Alpha. He smiled, cold and cruel. The hierarchy exists because some wolves are born superior. That's simply nature. Nature didn't create your hierarchy. Morgana's voice rang out. The keeper stepped forward, flanked by Kale and Iris. Greed did, fear did, the need to dominate and control. The first wolves were equal, the sanctuary remembers, even if you've forgotten. The fantasies of old fools. Severin dismissed. It doesn't matter what was. What matters is what is. And what is that Theron dies today, and his shadow speaker with him. The old ways will be preserved. The old ways are already dying, Theron said quietly, and something in his voice made the council members pause. You think killing us will stop what's coming? You think you can murder prophecy? Every wolf with an ounce of primordial blood felt it when our bond completed. They felt the shift in power, the change in the air. Word is spreading even now. A shadow speaker lives, bonded to the Alpha King. The hierarchy can be challenged, can be changed. Then we'll kill everyone who heard, Ragnar said flatly. Everyone who believes. We'll drown this revolution in blood before it begins. You can't kill everyone, Elara tried to say, but her damaged throat produced only a rasp of sound. Through the bond, Theron felt her frustration, her fury, and he spoke for her. She says you can't kill everyone. And she's right. The harder you squeeze, the more wolves will slip through your fingers. The more you try to preserve your power through violence, the faster you'll lose it. Enough philosophy, Arcturus said, bored. Shadowbreaker, dispel their magic. Mercenaries, finish. This. The witch raised her hands, and Elara felt the woman's power gathering not just to strip away shadows, but to sever the bond itself. To tear apart what she and Theron had built, to leave them isolated and weak. No, Elara thought fiercely. She reached through the bond, grabbed hold of Theron's strength, and he poured it into her willingly. Their combined power surged through her body, and when she opened her mouth this time, sound emerged. Not words, her throat was too damaged for that, but a note, pure, crystalline, breaking, and beautiful. The same note she'd used to awaken the sanctuary, but stronger now, amplified by Theron's ancient power, by the bond between them, by every ounce of defiance she'd stored up through 6 years of silence. The Shadowbreaker's magic shattered. The mercenaries stumbled, covering their ears. Even the council members flinched back from the force of her song. And the sanctuary, the ancient stones that had slept for so long, woke fully. The pillars blazed with light so bright it burned. The symbols carved into them came alive, flowing off the stone and into the air, forming shapes of the first wolves, the ones who'd run together before hierarchy poisoned their unity. The ground beneath them trembled, and cracks spider-webbed outward from the stone circle. "What have you done?" Arcturus demanded, his composure finally cracking. "Woken what you tried to bury." Elara answered through the bond, and Theron spoke her words aloud. "The sanctuary is the oldest magic, older than your council, older than your laws, and it remembers what you've forgotten, that wolves were meant to be equal." The light from the pillars spread outward in waves, washing over everyone in the cavern. Where it touched the mercenaries, they dropped their weapons, confusion crossing their faces as if waking from a long dream. Where it touched Marcus, he stumbled backward, his hand going to his throat to the scars Elara had left there 6 years ago. "What is this?" he whispered, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was no cruelty in his voice, only bewilderment. "Truth," Morgana said softly. "The sanctuary is showing you truth, making you see what the hierarchy has hidden, that your strength was built on the suffering of others, that your power was never yours to take, only yours to abuse." The light touched the Alpha Council members last, and all 3 recoiled as if burned, but they couldn't escape it. The sanctuary's judgment was absolute, inescapable. Arcturus fell to his knees, his face twisted with something between rage and grief. No, we were right. We had to be right. The hierarchy maintains order, maintains civilization. The hierarchy maintains you," Theron said, his voice cutting through Arcturus's denial. "And you've murdered anyone who threatened that. But that ends now." The light intensified one final time, then faded, leaving them all standing in the gentle glow of the stone pillars. The cavern was silent except for breathing, except for the sound of weapons clattering to the ground as mercenary after mercenary chose to walk away rather than continue fighting. Marcus stood frozen, staring at Elara with something like recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "You could have killed me," he said slowly. "6 years ago, when I tried to force the bond. You could have torn my throat out instead of just scarring it, but you didn't." "I didn't want to kill you," Elara signed, and through the bond, Theron spoke for her. "I just wanted to be free. I never wanted violence, never wanted revenge. Just wanted to exist without fear." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and the words sounded like they were being torn from him. "I'm sorry for what I did, what my pack did, what I would have kept doing if..." He gestured helplessly at the sanctuary. "If this hadn't shown me, it wasn't enough. It couldn't erase 6 years of suffering, couldn't undo the damage to her throat, couldn't give back what had been stolen. But it was something. A crack in the foundation of the hierarchy. A beginning." "The Alpha Council is dissolved," Theron declared, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The old laws are revoked, and any wolf who wants to challenge that decision can face me in combat for the right to rule." None of the 3 former council members moved. The sanctuary's truth had broken something in them, not their bodies, but their certainty, their belief that they were justified in their cruelty. "We'll need new laws," Morgana said quietly. "New structures that don't require some wolves to suffer for others to thrive. It won't be easy. Change never is. But it's necessary," Kale added. "The sanctuary has spoken. The prophecy has manifested. There's no going back now." And then, Elara looked up at Theron, and through the bond, felt his uncertainty beneath the commanding exterior. He'd waited 300 years for this moment, had fought and bled and survived for the chance to change the system. But now that it was here, the reality of rebuilding an entire culture was overwhelming. "We don't have to do it alone," she reminded him through the bond. "We have the keepers. We have each other. We have every wolf who's been broken by the hierarchy and wants something better." His hand found hers, squeezed gently. "You're right," he said aloud. "We're not alone. Not anymore." He turned to address the gathered wolves, mercenaries, keepers, even the former council members, What happens next is a choice. You can cling to the old ways, try to preserve a system that's already dying, or you can help build something new, something better, where an Omega's life matters as much as an Alpha's, where shadow speakers aren't hunted but honored, where no wolf is cast aside for being different. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, wolves began to kneel not in submission, but in acknowledgement, not because they feared Theron's power, but because they'd felt the sanctuary's truth and couldn't deny it. Marcus knelt. Then the mercenaries. Then, finally, grudgingly, the 3 former council members bent their knees. "We accept your authority, Alpha King," Arcturus said, his voice hollow, "and we will answer for our crimes when you judge us." "Not when I judge you," Theron corrected. "When we judge you, all of us together, a council of equals, not a hierarchy of oppression." He looked at Elara. "Starting with the wolf who has the most right to seek justice." All eyes turned to her. Elara felt the weight of that attention, felt the expectation that she'd demand vengeance, demand blood for blood, suffering for suffering. But that wasn't who she was, wasn't who she'd ever been. The old laws demanded punishment. Her hands moved, and Theron's voice gave them sound. But I think the new laws should demand something harder: change, growth, becoming better than what you were. She looked at Marcus, at the council members, at all the wolves who'd enforced the hierarchies. Cruelty. You can't undo what was done, can't give back what you took. But you can choose differently going forward. Can choose to protect instead of harm, to lift up instead of tear down. "That's it?" Severin asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "No punishment? No execution? Living with what you've done, truly understanding the harm you caused, and working to repair it," Elara signed. "That's harder than dying. That's the real punishment and the real path to redemption." Theron's pride flowed through the bond, warm and steady. He raised his voice to carry across the entire cavern. "Let it be known the hierarchy ends today. The old laws are dissolved, and we begin again, together, as equals. Any wolf who cannot accept that is free to leave, but any wolf who stays will be held to a new standard. Not dominance, but compassion. Not power over others, but strength shared among all." The sanctuary's pillars pulsed once, as if in approval, and Elara felt, through the bond and through, her connection to the ancient magic, the ripple of change spreading outward, across the borderlands, through the territories, into every pack that had felt the shift when their bond completed. The prophecy wasn't just about her and Theron. It was about every wolf who'd been broken by the system, every Omega told they were worthless, every shadow speaker hunted to extinction, every wolf who didn't fit perfectly into the hierarchy's narrow definitions. It was about all of them, rising together, and refusing to accept a world that demanded some wolves bleed so others could thrive. "What now?" Iris asked quietly. Theron looked at Elara, and she looked back, and through the bond they shared a moment of perfect understanding. "Now," Elara signed, and Theron spoke, "we rebuild, together." And in the ancient sanctuary, surrounded by wolves who'd been enemies hours before but might become allies given time and truth, Elara felt something she hadn't felt since her grandmother died. Hope. The broken Omega and the Alpha King, bound by destiny and choice in equal measure, had survived. And in surviving, they'd sparked a revolution that would reshape the wolf world forever. The hierarchy's reign was ending, and something better, something born of pain and perseverance and the refusal to be silenced, was finally beginning. 6 months had passed since the sanctuary awakened, and the northern territories had transformed in ways even Theron hadn't dared imagine during his 3 centuries of waiting. Elara stood at the window of their shared chambers in the restored stone fortress that now served as the seat of the new Council of Equals, watching the sun set over what had once been the borderlands. The forbidden zone where she'd hidden for 6 years was now a thriving settlement, a sanctuary for outcasts, for rejected wolves, for anyone seeking a fresh start under the new laws. "You're thinking too loud." Theron's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. His arms, wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "I can feel your worry through the bond." Elara leaned into him, signing against his chest where he could feel the movement. "Tomorrow's trial. Marcus and the former council members. What if the assembly demands execution instead of rehabilitation? Then we'll remind them that the new ways require new thinking." Theron murmured against her hair. "That vengeance and justice aren't the same thing. That's why we wrote it into the founding laws. Punishment must serve transformation, not just retribution. Through their bond, Elara felt his certainty, but also his own underlying anxiety. Change was never easy, and not everyone had embraced the dissolution of the hierarchy. 3 packs had left the Northern Territories entirely, choosing exile over equality. Others remained but resisted, clinging to old prejudices even as the structures that had supported them crumbled. Do you ever regret it? Elara's hands asked. 300 years of power, given up for an uncertain future? Theron turned her in his arms, his gold eyes fierce and tender at once. I spent 300 years with power and no purpose beyond maintaining a system I hated. Now I have you, have real change, have hope for the first time since the Great Division. Regret? He smiled. Never. A knock at the door interrupted them. Morgana entered at Theron's call, followed by an unexpected guest, Luna Margaret, Aldrich's mother from the old stories, now serving as one of the 12 members of the Council of Equals. Forgive the intrusion, Margaret said, bowing her head respectfully to them both, a gesture of courtesy, not submission. But there's been a development. The Eastern Pacts have sent an emissary. They want to discuss joining the new treaty. Theron's eyebrows rose. The Eastern Pacts? They were the loudest voices against reform. Until their Omegas began leaving, Morgana said with grim satisfaction. Entire groups of them, walking away from packs that abused them, coming here where they know they'll be protected. The Alphas are finally realizing that power means nothing without wolves to lead. How many have come? Elara asked. 43 this month alone, Margaret replied, understanding Elara's signs after months of practice. We're running out of housing. The settlement expands daily. It was a good problem to have, but still a problem. Elara had been working with a team of healers, including several former Omegas, who'd discovered gifts they'd never been allowed to develop, to establish clinics, schools, training centers. But growth this rapid strained every resource. We'll need to discuss expansion at tomorrow's council session, Theron said. After the trial. Margaret's expression turned serious. About that there's something you should know. Marcus has requested to speak. Not in his defense, but he says he has information about other shadow speakers, others who might have survived. Elara's heart stuttered. She'd believed herself the last, had mourned the loss of her people even as she'd embraced her role in their resurrection. The possibility that others existed, hidden and afraid somewhere in the territories, sent hope and terror through her in equal measure. Where? Her hands demanded. He won't say until the trial. Claims it's his contribution to rehabilitation, helping find and protect what his actions helped nearly destroy. Margaret shrugged. It could be a manipulation. Or it could be genuine. Only one way to find out, Theron said. He squeezed Elara's hand. Whatever he says, whatever comes next, we face it together. The trial took place in the great hall of the fortress, but not in the way trials had been conducted under the old laws. There was no throne, no raised platform for judgment. Instead, wolves sat in a circle, the 12 council members, the accused, and representatives from every pack in the territories. Equality in structure as well as spirit. Marcus stood in the center, looking haggard but clear-eyed. 6 months of genuine reflection had changed him, carved away the arrogance that had defined him. When he spoke, his voice was steady but humble. I stand accountable for my crimes, he began, for the abuse of Elara Nightwhisper, for hunting shadow speakers on behalf of the old council, for the violence I inflicted in service of a hierarchy that valued power over compassion. He met Elara's eyes. I cannot undo what was done. I can only work to ensure it never happens again. And the information about other shadow speakers? Theron prompted. 3, Marcus said, hidden in remote packs, their families concealing their gifts to protect them from what happened to Elara's bloodline. I have names, locations, proof. He held out a folded parchment. I offer this freely, asking nothing in return but the chance to help repair what I helped break. Elara took the parchment with trembling hands. 3 shadow speakers, 3 survivors of her grandmother's people, 3 chances to rebuild what had been nearly extinguished. The council deliberated briefly, then Margaret spoke for them. The Council of Equals finds Marcus Ashwood guilty of crimes against the person and the community. His sentence is 10 years of service, establishing and maintaining safe houses for wolves fleeing abusive packs, teaching young alphas about the harm of unchecked dominance, and personally ensuring the safety of the 3 shadow speakers he has identified. "I accept," Marcus said, and there was relief in his voice. A purpose, a path forward, a way to transform guilt into action. As the assembly dispersed, as wolves filed out discussing the trial and its implications, Elara remained seated, staring at the parchment in her hands. 3 names, 3 locations, 3 lives she was responsible for protecting now. "It's too much," she signed to Theron. "I don't know how to lead them, how to teach them. I'm still learning myself." "Then you'll learn together," Theron said simply. "That's what community means. You're not alone in this, Elara. You're not alone in anything anymore." She looked around the great hall at Morgana, discussing treaty terms with the Eastern emissary, at Margaret helping a newly arrived Omega family find temporary housing, at former mercenaries now serving as protectors instead of hunters. 6 months ago, this had been a dream, a desperate hope born in blood and pain in an ancient cavern. Now it was real, imperfect, challenging, constantly evolving but real. That night, Elara stood once more at the window of their chambers, but this time she wasn't alone in her watching. Theron stood beside her, and through their bond, she felt his thoughts mingling with hers, hopes and fears and determination all tangled together. "Do you think we'll succeed?" she asked through their connection. "Really succeed, not just survive?" "I think," Theron said slowly, "that we've already succeeded in the ways that matter most. We survived what should have killed us. We turned pain into purpose. We proved that the hierarchy wasn't inevitable, that wolves could choose differently." He pulled her close. "Everything else, the politics, the expansion, the challenges, those are just details. The hard part was believing change was possible. We've done that. The rest is just work." Elara smiled, her damaged throat unable to laugh but her heart light nonetheless. Just work. As if rebuilding an entire culture from the ground up was simple. But maybe it was, when you had a partner who'd waited 300 years for the chance to try. When you had a bond that turned weakness into strength, isolation into community, silence into the loudest kind of speech. The broken Omega who couldn't speak, and the ancient king who'd forgotten how to hope, had found each other in the darkness of the borderlands. Together, they'd awakened magic that had slept for centuries. Together, they'd challenged laws that had stood for millennia. And together, they would build something better than what had been broken. In the territories below, lights began to glow in windows, wolves settling in for the night, safe in ways they'd never been before. Omegas who didn't fear their alphas. Shadow speakers who could practice their gifts openly. Young wolves growing up believing that equality was natural, that hierarchy had been the aberration, not the rule. It would take generations to fully heal what the old ways had damaged. There would be setbacks, resistance, wolves who clung to power and privilege, even as the world shifted beneath them. But standing at the window with Theron's arms around her, and the bond humming between them like a second heartbeat, Elara felt something she'd thought lost forever in that ravine 6 years ago, when the Ashwood pack had cast her out. She felt like she belonged, like she had a home, like the future, uncertain as it was, held more promise than threat. The mute Omega had found her voice not in words, but in action, in the laws they'd written, in the community they'd built, in the bond that proved 2 damaged souls could heal together. And in the territories that had once cast her aside as defective, Elara Nightwhisper was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.